me on a quilting tale today. My name is Shaylin and today's video is inspired by a viewer's request. Victoria had recently asked me in the comment section of a video how I got my bonus half square triangles when I was making the heartfelt quilt-along blocks. And so I thought I would show not only an in-depth tutorial on how I got those bonus half square triangles, but also 4 additional methods for making half square triangles in case you're new to quilting and you haven't made them before, or maybe you only know of one method. I thought I could show you some more that might work for you. Some are better if you need just a couple half square triangles, and others work well if you need several of the same type. So hopefully one of these methods will work well for you. A lot of times patterns will tell you which method to use, so you may have seen some of these, or you might see something brand new today. I also want to share a way of making hourglass blocks with half square triangles, because that's another way you can just kind of up the fanciness of your half square triangles. So first let me talk about what a half square triangle is. It starts as 2 square pieces of fabric that you sew right sides together with a diagonal seam. So once you cut them apart, and I'm going to show you 4 different ways, like I said, to do that, plus the bonus way, you end up with 2 triangles that form a new square, and so you'll get at least 2 half square triangles every time you put your 2 pieces of fabric together, and in some cases you can get more, and I'll show you how to do that. But this is a half square triangle, and I mentioned hourglass blocks. They just make an hourglass shape like so, and so this is just a more simple one made with 2 half square triangles. I've also been using those bonus blocks like I mentioned with the heartfelt quilt along, and so I've been making some hourglass blocks with those that have a little bit more of a scrappy look to them. There's more than 2 fabrics present in here. There's just many ways that you can make them, and they can just add a little more pizzazz to your blocks, or you can put them together to make a whole new block. I'll show you some examples of those at the very end of this video too. So let's get right into it. I'm going to show you the first method now. This first method is probably the most common one that I see described in quilt patterns, and that's going to be to put your 2 squares right sides together, draw a diagonal line from corner to corner, usually on the lighter fabric, and then stitch a 1/4 inch away on each side of the diagonal line, and then cut. And if it's from a pattern, it'll tell you how big to make the squares. If you're using this method to make your own, I usually just upsize the squares 1 inch just to make it easier for cutting. You don't need quite 1 inch, so there will be a little waste with this way, but I do 1 inch just to make for easy cutting and just to make sure I have enough. So I have 3-inch squares here because I want 2-inch half square triangles in this example. So if I want 2 inches, I add 1 inch to it to know how large to cut my squares. And again, there'll be some extra. You don't need quite 1 inch. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a diagonal line from corner to corner. And just a regular old pencil works. And then we'll line our pieces up. And now I'm just going to stitch a 1/4 inch on each side, making sure that my corners are as lined up as possible. You could put a pin running parallel with the line if you wanted, or maybe a couple. If you're using measurements from a pattern and you're not sure that it's supposed to cut exactly on the half square triangle size you need, you could always do a scant 1/4 inch, which is just a hair or a thread width or 2 less than a full 1/4 inch. You could do that if you were worried about not having a large enough half square triangle. Okay, and now you can either cut with scissors or you can cut with your rotary cutter and a ruler. But I'm just going to put my ruler right on the drawn pencil line and cut. And here I have my first half square triangle. I usually press toward the darker fabric, and this next part is going to be the same no matter which method you use, so I'm just going to show it the one time here, but I'll show you how I prepare and trim down my half square triangles no matter what method you use. So let's go on over to the ironing board. First I start by just setting my seams, just hold the dry iron over it, over my stitches. And now I'm just going to be careful to peel it and just kind of smush it down. I don't want to stretch it too much because this is bias edge here, and so it can change the shape of my block. So I would just run my iron parallel with that seam line. I do it first with a dry iron, and then I add a little bit of water to steam it. Okay. And then same with the other. So this method gives you 2 half square triangles at a time, and it's nice for if you need a bunch of different combinations of fabric, because you're just making 2 at a time. So from here I'm going to trim it down. Alright, so when I'm ready to trim my half square triangle down, remember I originally said I wanted a 2-inch half square triangle, so I added an extra inch, and that should be plenty. In fact, if I line up the diagonal line of my ruler with the diagonal of my half square triangle, I can see that I could pretty comfortably get a 2.5-inch half square triangle, because I see the 2.5-inch mark here and down here that there's fabric coming past both sides. So really I didn't even need a whole inch. But the nice thing about having extra is you can decide what you want visible in the half square triangle. If you cut it exactly, you're kind of stuck with whatever's showing in the fabric. But if I want, you know, this rose to be in the center of my half square triangle, and I'm trying to do a 2-inch, I just look at my 2-inch mark here and my 2-inch mark here. I can center that rose and where the 1-inch marks intersect to get it in the center, keeping my diagonal line of the ruler on the diagonal line of my seam, and then I can go ahead and cut. Okay. Then I'm going to just rotate the half square triangle so this remaining dog ear is in the upper right corner, and I'm going to put my ruler back so the diagonals are matched up, and this time my corner that has been cut will go on the 2-inch mark, and I just need to cut the edges again. So there's no centering to do this time. I just match the corner up. And there I have my 2-inch half square triangle. So the benefits of this method is that you can decide what's going to be visible in your half square triangle. There's little waste even if you do add an extra inch. You can see there isn't a whole lot of waste coming off here, and you'll get an accurate size because you can trim it down to the size that you need. The only thing you have to be careful about is making sure you don't stretch the bias edges when you're pressing it open. So other than that, it's a really simple, easy one to make and get accurate pieces. So let's look at another method now. This next method I don't see as often in patterns, but I have come across it a few times and it works well. And so you'll take your 2 squares again, and if it's in a pattern it'll tell you the size. If you're trying to make your own half square triangles, you're going to want to add 3/8 of an inch at least to the half square triangle size that you desire. So again, if you make it more than 3/8 inches, you don't want to deal with a less common fraction like 3/8. You can always go up to a 1/2 inch or something that's, you know, just easier to cut and trim it down. But this should give you the exact amount. So we're going to add 3/8 inches. I want 2.5 inch half square triangles once they're all cut. So I added 3/8 inches. So I made this, I cut these squares to 2 7/8 inches. So I just want to show you what happens when you try and do it precisely instead of like my last method where I had extra and trimmed it down. So I'm going to cut from corner to corner on each of these pieces here. Now for this method to work well, you have to really get from corner to corner. You might use a line on your cutting mat to, you know, line up the corner pieces, the corners of your square too. I'm just kind of eyeballing this one, and you'll put right sides together, and then you're going to sew a 1/4 inch. And again, if you're worried about it coming up short, you might do a scant 1/4 inch down the flat side. Now again, this is going to be bias edging, so you want to be careful not to stretch it and, you know, pull it taut when you're sending it through. You just want a gentle hand sending it through the sewing machine. So if you notice, like mine here, my pink piece underneath is slightly larger, and so if this happens, I would just try and line up the non-biased edges, and then when I sew my 1/4 inch, it's going to be a 1/4 inch on the pink. It's going to be slightly less on the light yellow on top, but that's okay. It'll still be enough in there. So I'm just going to lightly hold it and send it through a 1/4 inch. And this one is more precise. Alright, so I'm not gonna press it open and trim it down just for time's sake, because like I said, it's all going to be the same way. But again, you want to be careful with the bias edging here. But I just want to show you the measurements with this. So if I put my ruler So that's another method. Just again, be careful not to stretch the bias edges when you're sewing it together. But this one is a nice one because there's very little waste. It's quicker. It just takes one seam to make your half square triangle. So that's another nice method to use. Now let's talk about if you're making several of the same half square triangles and you want to make multiples at once, more than 2 at a time. You may have seen these rulers like the strip tube ruler. These are great for making half square triangles, and I love using mine. But my goal is to show you some methods that don't require special rulers, and this one you can get the same effect with your own regular ruler. And the strip tube ruler is nice because you can use jelly roll strips are a really common one for making 2.5 inch or smaller half square triangles. But for this to work, you're going to make what's called a strip tube, and you're going to need 2 pieces of fabric that are in long strips, and so that's why jelly roll strips work well. I cut these into 3-inch strips, and I'm going to be making 3-inch half square triangles with these. So to do this, you're going to make your strip tube just by lining up your edges, and you're going to sew a 1/4 inch down both sides of the strips. So as you can see, well, hopefully it shows up, there's a 1/4 inch seam down both sides of my strip tube, and we call it a tube because it's open on both ends. So now let me show you how you can achieve a similar effect to a strip tube ruler just using your own regular ruler. So to make something similar to a strip tube ruler, or any ruler that's designed to make half square triangles. You're just going to need your regular ruler, and mine in this case goes to 6.5 inches, so I can make up to 6.5 inch half square triangles here. But you'll need a regular ruler and either washi tape like I'm using, or painter's tape, something that won't leave a residue and can come off easily. But if I'm making 3-inch half square triangles, that's the width of my strip tubes, I'm going to align the top of my tape to the 3-inch mark on both sides of my ruler. So I want it to just touch both 3-inch sides here. And you can take a peek to just make sure it's touching the 3-inch mark, maybe adjust it if you need to. And then I like to, just because it kind of covers the numbers and you can't always see where it says 3, I just take a little Sharpie or something and draw arrows. Actually, if I can get a working tip here, draw arrows pointing to the top, because I aligned the top of this tape to the 3-inch side. That way I'm not trying to use the bottom here. And so then all I need to do is get my cutting mat. And so now I'm just going to take my cutting mat and rotary cutter and my strip tube, and I'm going to align the top edge of the tape on my stitch line, my bottom stitch line here. I don't want to go to the edge, because this is going to be my 1/4-inch seam for my half square triangle. So I want to line up my tape right on the stitch line. I want to make sure that there's enough fabric overhanging on the side that I'm not going to run out of fabric when I'm cutting. So I'm going to just make my first cut across the top here, and then I'm trying not to hit the camera, so this is an awkward angle for me, but I'm going to just cut on both sides. So you can see there is a little waste on this, but I'm going to have my first half square triangle right here, and if I measure it, again I would press it flat, but if I measure it with my ruler here, actually let me get a different one that doesn't have tape on it so it's easier to see. I'm just gonna finger press it down, try and get it flat. If I just take my ruler here, zoom in so you can see that when I line up the diagonal line to the diagonal seam, it is exactly 3 inches. So this is a great method if you need multiple half square triangles of the same fabric and you want it to be exact. So all I need to do is press it and then just trim off the dog ears. And so let me show you how you make your next cut. I'm going to line up my cut edge. It still lines up perfectly with my ruler. I'm going to align my tape, and because I have those arrows there, I can point to the stitch line that I want to align it to. And now I'm just going to make another cut just on this side this time. So there's a second half square triangle. And then when it's time to do the third, you usually will have to scoot it over a little. If I tried to align the edge here, my stitch line is way down here. So you need to make a fresh cut usually on the third half square triangle. So I'm just going to align my tape to my stitch line again, making sure I have enough hanging out off the side here, and I'm just going to make 2 fresh cuts. Again, this is just a weird angle with the camera. I wouldn't normally cut like this. But there's another one, and then flip again my ruler and line it up. Okay. And then I'm ready for a fresh cut. And I might be able to get one more out of this. Let's see. Yes, I will. Okay, so this wasn't, the strip tube set I made wasn't nearly as long as jelly roll strips, but you can see that I got 6 half square triangles out of that bit, and these are 3-inch half square triangles, so I just made 3-inch strip tubes. So that's what's nice about it is you can get the exact size you need with easy math, because you just cut your strips to the size of the half square triangles you want. And so it's accurate, it's quick at making multiple half square triangles at the same time. It's good if you need, you know, multiples of the same combination of fabrics. And it just requires items that you probably have at home, like painter's tape or the washi tape or the 1/4-inch seam tape that you can put on your sewing machine. I wouldn't recommend this method if you just needed a couple half square triangles, because to make the strip tubes can be a little time consuming to cut the strips and then sew down both sides. So I would recommend this if you are trying to make multiples, but it's a very accurate way of getting your half square triangles, and you just need to cut off the dog ears. This last method is good for making 4 half square triangles at a time that have the same fabrics in them. And so again, depending on what size half square triangle you want, you're going to add 1 5/8 inches at a minimum to it. You can always go higher to deal with an easier fraction and just cut it down from there like I demonstrated the first time. But with this method, if you want exact pieces, add 1 5/8 inches to the half square triangle size you want. So in this one, I want 2.5-inch half square triangles. When I add 1 5/8, that is 4 1/8 inches. So that's the size squares that I cut here. And for this one, we are going to sew, we're going to put our pieces right sides together and sew a 1/4 inch away from the perimeter all around the 4 sides. Then we're going to cut diagonally on both sides. Alright, so I have my squares aligned on all the edges, right sides together, and I'm just going to sew a 1/4 inch away from the edge. And when I get near the edge, I'm going to stop about a 1/4 inch away, just kind of eyeballing it. Then I'm going to just lift my presser foot, keep the needle down, and pivot. I can see that I didn't go quite far enough, so I'm going to just do another stitch or 2. And now I'm going to pivot down again, stop about a 1/4 inch away. And that last one I can go all the way to the end with. And I'm just going to cut diagonal to diagonal. And it's nice if you have a rotating cutting mat, you don't have to move the pieces. Or you could just turn the whole board around. And again, diagonal to diagonal. You want to try and get the ruler to line up where those intersection points are, and hopefully that's diagonal to diagonal. But now I have 4 half square triangles, and I said I wanted them to be 2.5 inches. So again, I press those later. If I put my ruler on here, you can see I'm at 2.5 inches on both sides with just the slightest little overhang. So I could trim it down, or you probably will get some pretty exact pieces. In some of these you might just have to trim off the dog ears, but that's another way that you can get pretty accurate half square triangles. The last method I'm going to show is just where you might get some bonus half square triangles from the stitch and flip method. So let me show you that one. I'm making half heart units from a heartfelt quilt along pattern, and these are 3.5 inch white squares. Normally at this point with the stitch and flip method, I'd just cut a 1/4 inch away from the stitch line, but because I'm cutting off quite a bit of fabric, I'm going to make an additional bonus half square triangle. 3 to 3.5 inch squares are about the smallest I'd go with this method. Start by drawing a line a 1/4 inch away from the stitch line on the side closest to the corner that's going to be cut off. I'll do this for all my pieces. And then I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch away from that drawn line on the side of the corner that will be cut off. I use chain piecing for multiple units. Now I'm going to cut along that drawn pencil line, leaving a 1/4 inch seam allowance on each side. I can trim up my half square triangle using the same procedure I showed in method 1. This pattern makes 20 half heart units, which means 20 bonus half square triangles that I didn't want to go to waste. What started as a 3.5 inch square can make a 2 3/4 inch half square triangle. I've been trimming them to 2.5 inches because that's a more common size to work with. No matter which method you use to make your half square triangles, making the hourglass block is the same process. So I tend to press my seams to the darker fabric. And so when you make your half square triangles, you want to nest your seams so that they align and you can fill them and lock into place. So if you look and see, I have kind of the opposites, fabrics touching each other. So on one side of the half square triangle, you're going to draw a diagonal line that's going the opposite corners from your stitch line. So if I have a stitch line going from here to here, I'm going to draw with just my pencil another line going the opposite way. So it kind of makes an X with the stitches. So I've got my pencil line drawn on there. And so I'm going to do what I did in the first method with the half square triangle. I'm going to stitch a 1/4 inch on each side, a 1/4 inch away from the pencil line on each side of the line. And to get an idea of how that will look and just make sure that it's going to be an hourglass block, you can hold your finger down on the line and just pull one edge down, and you can see that it'll look like that, which is what you want. So let me go ahead and stitch on both sides. Alright, and just like before, you could use your rotary cutter and your mat. Since this one's small, I'm just going to use my scissors here. And there you go. And you would press it just like you would your half square triangle. You could press it to one side or you could press it open, but you end up with 2 hourglass blocks. I will, at the end of this video, I'll link a video that I made talking about how to square up an hourglass block if you're interested in that. Hourglass blocks just give you a little more visual interest in your larger blocks that you're making, or if you want to make borders or something with it, you can really just let your creativity go with these, and so, or mix them with half square triangles and make all kinds of different block designs. Or again, if your pattern calls for an hourglass or half square triangle block, you now know several different ways you can make them. So now that you know a few methods for making half square triangles and hourglass blocks, you might be wondering, why would I want to make extras? You know, maybe you just need to use a method to help you build a larger block, and a half square triangle is just a unit in that block. But there are lots of ways that you can build interesting and dynamic blocks using just half square triangles or hourglass blocks. So I'm going to show you a few of those now. I just made a few different configurations with the half square triangles that I made for my demonstrations. I have a bunch of them now, so here are a few options you could make with them. There was something in this tutorial that you haven't seen before and you might consider trying it. It might make creating half square triangles easier for you or more efficient. Either way, I appreciate you watching, and if you liked this video and would like more tips like this, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe so I know what kinds of videos to make. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.